Judge laughs at crying black man in court, but has no idea who's about to walk in. The Westfield County Courthouse stood as it had for over a century, its weathered limestone facade a testament to enduring authority. Courtroom 4 bustled with the day's docket, minor violations, petty misdemeanors, and the endless parade of human stories that cycled through the judicial system daily. Judge Howard Mercer presided with the efficient detachment of a man who had seen it all in his 30 years on the bench. Case number 247B, County of Westfield versus Elias Monroe, called the clerk, her voice carrying through the wood-paneled room. From the back of the courtroom rose a tall, slender man whose movements carried the careful deliberation of age. At 79, Elias Monroe moved with dignity, despite the visible arthritis in his hands. His suit, clearly old but meticulously maintained, hung slightly loose on his frame, suggesting a man who had once carried more weight. His white hair contrasted sharply with his deep brown skin, and his eyes, though clouded with cataracts, remained alert and observant. As Elias made his way slowly to the defendant's table, whispers rippled through the gallery. In this predominantly white county, his presence alone drew attention. He stood before the bench, unrepresented by counsel, his back straight, despite the years that had bent it. Judge Mercer glanced down at the file, then at Elias, his expression shifting from boredom to mild irritation at what he clearly viewed as a routine case taking too much time. "Mr. Monroe, you are charged with unlawful occupation of condemned property at 1520 Maple Street. Do you understand the charge against you?" "Yes, Your Honor, I do," Elias replied, his voice soft but clear, carrying the gentle cadence of the Deep South. "And how do you plead?" Elias paused, his hands clasped before him. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Judge Mercer's eyebrows rose slightly. He had clearly expected a guilty plea and a quick resolution. "Mr. Monroe, the building in question has been designated as condemned by the county for nearly 8 months. The records show you've been repeatedly warned to vacate. The property is scheduled for demolition next week as part of the Westfield Renewal Project." "I understand that's what the papers say, Your Honor," Elias responded. "These aren't just papers, Mr. Monroe. These are legal notices issued by the county." The judge's tone carried a condescension that made several observers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "The building is unsafe for habitation. With respect, Your Honor, that house has stood for 112 years. It weathered the flood of 72 and the tornadoes of 998. It's not unsafe." Judge Mercer sighed audibly. "Mr. Monroe, I don't have time for sentimentality. The county engineers have made their determination. The question before this court is simply whether you have continued to occupy the property after being legally notified not to do so. The evidence suggests you have." Elias remained silent, his expression revealing nothing. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" The judge prompted, his impatience growing. "Only that I have a right to be there, Your Honor." "Based on what exactly?" "Based on the fact that I built it." A ripple of confusion passed through the courtroom. Judge Mercer leaned forward. "Mr. Monroe, the property records show that house was built in 1911. You expect this court to believe that He glanced at the file. 79 years old, built a house over a century ago. Scattered laughter emerged from the gallery. The judge made no attempt to silence it, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Perhaps you mean your grandfather built it." "No, Your Honor. Elias replied, his dignity undiminished. I built it with these hands. He held up his gnarled fingers. Over many years, starting in 1967, Mr. Monroe, the county records clearly show the county records are incorrect. Elias interrupted a flash of emotion breaking through his composed exterior, just as they've been incorrect about many things concerning people who look like me. The judge's amusement vanished, replaced by stern authority. Mr. Monroe, this court will not entertain unfounded accusations of bias. The fact remains that you are occupying condemned property slated for necessary urban renewal. Necessary for whom, Your Honor? Elias asked softly, his eyes suddenly glistening with unshed tears. That house holds 60 years of my life. My children grew up there, my wife died there, every board, every nail was placed by my hands. A single tear escaped trailing down his weathered cheek. From the bench, Judge Mercer let out what could only be described as a chuckle of disbelief. Mr. Monroe, while I sympathize with your attachment to the property, emotional appeals won't change the law. The facts are simple. The house is condemned, you've been ordered to vacate, and you've failed to comply. The judge's dismissive tone and the lingering echo of his inappropriate laughter hung in the air. Elias stood perfectly still, his tears now flowing freely, but silently, his dignity somehow untouched by the judge's condescension. I find you guilty of unlawful occupation and order you to vacate the premises immediately. You will also pay a fine of $500 for continued disregard of county ordinances. Next case. As the judge began to move on, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A woman entered with purposeful strides, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The heads in the gallery turned as one drawn by her commanding presence. Dr. Naomi Monroe moved through the courtroom like a force of nature. At 45, she carried herself with the confident authority of someone accustomed to being heard and respected. Her tailored suit and precisely styled hair spoke of professional success. But it was the determined set of her jaw that commanded attention. In one hand, she carried a leather portfolio. In the other, a collection of documents, bound in blue legal folders. Your Honor, she called, her voice clear and unwavering. I request permission to address the court regarding this case. Judge Mercer, clearly annoyed at the interruption, frowned. Madam, this case has been decided. If you wish to speak to the court, you'll need to wait your turn on the docket. I'm Dr. Naomi Monroe, daughter of the defendant and executor of our family's legal affairs. I have evidence directly relevant to these proceedings that the court must consider. The judge's expression shifted subtly as he registered her title and composed demeanor. Dr. Monroe, while I appreciate your concern for your father, the matter is far from settled. Your Honor, she interrupted, approaching the bench with confidence, and if you'll permit me to present this evidence, I believe you'll find cause to reconsider your ruling immediately. Something in her tone, the absolute certainty it conveyed, gave the judge pause. After a moment's consideration, he nodded reluctantly. Very well, Dr. Monroe. The court will hear your evidence. As Naomi moved to stand beside her father, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted palpably. Whatever was about to unfold, it was clear that Judge Mercer's casual dismissal of Elias Monroe's tears had been premature, and that the simple case he thought he was adjudicating was about to become considerably more complex. Naomi Monroe placed her materials on the defense table, organizing them with practiced efficiency. While the courtroom watched in curious silence, her father stood beside her, his posture straightening almost imperceptibly in her presence. "Your Honor," she began, "I'd like to introduce several pieces of evidence that directly contradict the county's claim regarding the property at 1520 Maple Street." She withdrew a large yellow document from her portfolio. "First, I present the original deed to the land dated 1962, showing that Elias Monroe purchased the plot from the Wilson estate. This deed has been properly recorded with the county registrar, though it appears to have been overlooked in recent records." The judge frowned, motioning for the clerk to bring him the document. He examined it with obvious skepticism. "This appears authentic, but it doesn't address the condition of the structure, which is the basis for the condemnation." "I'm coming to that, Your Honor," Naomi continued smoothly. She produced a second folder. "These are the original building permits approved by this very county in 1967 for construction of a residence at 1520 Maple Street. You'll note they bear my father's name as both owner and primary contractor." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Judge Mercer examined these documents with increasing discomfort. And finally, Naomi said, producing a third set of papers, "These are certificates of occupancy issued upon completion of each phase of construction from 1967 through 1972, all signed by county inspectors, certifying that the structure met or exceeded all building codes in effect at that time." "Dr. Monroe," the judge interjected, "while these historical documents are interesting, they don't address the current condition of the property, which has been deemed unsafe by modern standards." "I anticipated that objection, Your Honor," Naomi replied. She nodded to someone at the back of the courtroom, and a middle-aged white man in a suit came forward carrying a thick binder. "This is Robert Clemens, a licensed structural engineer with 30 years of experience. At my request, he conducted a thorough inspection of the property last week." Mr. Clemens approached the bench, handed the binder to the judge, and spoke clearly for the record. "Your Honor, my inspection found the structure at 1520 Maple Street to be fundamentally sound, while there are minor issues typical of a building. Its age none justify condemnation. In fact, its construction is exceptional, hand-cut joinery techniques rarely seen in modern buildings' foundation work that has prevented the settling common in neighboring structures and roof design that has withstood decades of weather events." The courtroom had gone completely silent. Judge Mercer's face had lost its dismissive expression, replaced by growing concern, as he flipped through the engineer's detailed report. "Your Honor," Naomi continued, her voice taking on an edge of controlled intensity, "I would also like to address a discrepancy in the county's records. The document showing the property as being built in 1911 refers to a previous structure that was destroyed in a fire in 1960. That structure was indeed built in 1911 by the Wilson family, who were the previous owners of the land." She paused, making eye contact with several members of the county council who were present in the courtroom. What's particularly troubling is that these records were correctly maintained until approximately 8 months ago. Coincidentally, around the same time, the Westfield Renewal Project targeted this area for revitalization. A visible tension spread through the room. One of the council members shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Furthermore," Naomi pressed on, "the condemnation notice was never properly served. My father received no certified mail, no in-person notification, as required by county ordinance. The first he heard of it was when demolition notices were posted on neighboring properties. The judge's expression had transformed entirely from his earlier condescension. "Dr. Monroe, are you suggesting impropriety on the part of county officials?" "I'm not merely suggesting it, Your Honor. I'm stating it plainly." She produced yet another document. This is a copy of the proposed development plan for the Westfield Renewal Project obtained through a Freedom of Information request. You'll note that my father's property, along with several others owned by elderly residents, most of them minorities, have been specifically targeted for acquisition at below-market rates. A councilman in the gallery stood abruptly. "Your Honor, these allegations are outrageous and irrelevant to the simple matter of code compliance." Judge Mercer banged his gavel. "Sit down, Councilman Parker. Dr. Monroe has the floor." His tone had shifted remarkably, the earlier dismissiveness replaced by growing concern. Naomi turned to face the gallery directly. "What the county has attempted here is nothing short of elder abuse and property theft under color of law. My father built that house with his own hands after being denied mortgages by 3 different banks. Despite having served this country in Korea and working for 40 years at the Westfield manufacturing plant." She returned her attention to the judge. "The true code violation here, Your Honor, is not my father's continued presence in the home he built, but the county's willful distortion of records to facilitate a land grab disguised as urban renewal." Elias stood silently beside his daughter. His tears now dried his expression, a mixture of pride and vindication. The courtroom remained hushed, the weight of Naomi's accusations hanging in the air. Judge Mercer studied the documents before him for several long moments. When he finally looked up, his demeanor had transformed entirely. "In light of this evidence, I am vacating my previous ruling against Mr. Monroe. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate stay on all demolition activities related to the Westfield Renewal Project, pending a full investigation into these allegations." He fixed his gaze on the county representatives present. "And I will personally refer this matter to the district attorney's office for review of possible misconduct. This court will not be party to the displacement of citizens through bureaucratic manipulation." Turning to Elias, the judge's voice softened with what appeared to be genuine regret. "Mr. Monroe, the court offers its sincere apology for the dismissive treatment you received today. Your emotion was not weakness, as I incorrectly perceived, but the righteous indignation of a man whose dignity and rights were being violated." Elias nodded once, accepting the apology with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout the proceedings. As the judge adjourned the court, the gallery erupted in whispered conversations. Naomi gathered her documents, placing a protective arm around her father's shoulders. Together, they made their way toward the exit, their path cleared by onlookers now viewing them with newfound respect and, in some cases, shame. Outside the courthouse, beneath a gentle autumn sun, Elias and Naomi sat on a bench in the small adjoining park. The immediate crisis had passed, but both knew that the fight to protect Elias's home and legacy was likely just beginning. "When did you find out about all this?" Elias asked, his voice tinged with both gratitude and concern. Naomi smiled, taking her father's weathered hand in hers. "I've been tracking the Westfield Renewal Project for months. Something about the targeting pattern didn't sit right with me. When you mentioned receiving notices about neighboring demolitions, I started digging. Elias nodded, gazing across the park toward the courthouse. "I should have called you sooner. I just didn't want to burden you with this. You've got your practice, your family." "Dad," Naomi said firmly, "you are my family, and that house isn't just a building, it's our history." A young reporter who had been in the courtroom approached hesitantly, notepad in hand. "Excuse me, Dr. Monroe, Mr. Monroe, I'm Lisa Chen from the Westfield Chronicle. Would you be willing to share your story? I think people should know what happened here today." Elias looked to his daughter, who nodded encouragingly. "Which part of the story would you like to hear, young lady?" he asked. "All of it?" she replied earnestly. "How you built the house, why it matters so much. I think our readers should understand what's really at stake in these renewal projects." Elias gestured for her to sit on the bench across from them. As she settled in, notebook ready, he began to speak, his voice gaining strength as he delved into memories long held close. "I came back from Korea in '55 with a Purple Heart and a dream of owning a home where my children could grow up safe. But Westfield wasn't welcoming to young black veterans looking to settle down. No realtor would work with me. No bank would lend to me." He paused, the memories clearly, still painful. "Decades later, I worked double shifts at the plant for years, saving every penny. In 1962, old Mr. Wilson, he'd been my father's employer years back, decided to sell off some of his land directly to me against the wishes of his family and neighbors." Lisa wrote rapidly, her expression intent with concentration. "Got that land and still couldn't get a construction loan," Elias continued. "So I started building on weekends and evenings after my shifts. Learned from books I borrowed from the library. Consulted with an old carpenter who didn't mind sharing knowledge with someone who looked like me, long as I came to his workshop after hours." Naomi squeezed his hand, gently encouraging him to continue. "Took me 5 years to complete enough of the house to move my family in. My wife, Gloria, she'd wait up no matter how late I came home from working on it. She'd have coffee ready, would help me bandage my hands when they bled from the work." His eyes grew distant with memory. "The day we moved in July 18th, 1972, was the proudest day of my life. Carried my little Naomi over the threshold, just 5 years old. Then we had neighbors who wouldn't speak to us. Got our mailbox knocked down more times than I can count. But that house stood firm. Our fortress." Lisa looked up from her notebook. "And you've lived there continuously since then?" "Every day," Elias confirmed. "Raised both my children there. My son Michael is a colonel in the Army, now stationed overseas. Naomi here became a doctor. My wife passed in that house 10 years ago, in the bedroom I built for us, with the eastern window she wanted for the morning light." "The county claims the house is unsafe," Lisa prompted gently. Elias's expression hardened slightly. "That house is sounder than most built 20 years ago. I maintained it meticulously. Every spring, I'd check the foundation. Every fall, I'd inspect the roof. Replaced wiring myself when codes changed. Installed new plumbing." "In '92, Naomi interjected. "The real issue isn't safety, it's location. Dad's house sits on what has suddenly become valuable land. The Westfield Renewal Project is really about clearing out long-term residents who own their homes outright, replacing them with commercial developments and luxury apartments." Lisa nodded, jotting this down. "And the county changed the records. They didn't just change them," Naomi explained. "They selectively ignored the correct records that didn't suit their narrative. The deed and building permits were still on file. They just chose to reference only the outdated property card that mentioned the previous structure from 1911. The young reporter looked up from her notes, her expression troubled. "Mr. Monroe, when the judge laughed at you in court today, how did that make you feel?" Elias sat silently for a moment, considering the question. With care, it wasn't the first time someone in authority has dismissed my truth. He finally said, "When you've lived as long as I have, you learn to recognize the pattern. People see an old black man getting emotional, they assume weakness or confusion. They don't consider that these tears might come from a lifetime of having to fight for every inch of dignity." He straightened his shoulders, a flash of the young soldier he had once been visible in his bearing. "But I've outlasted most who doubted me, and that house is my testimony. Every nail, every board holds the story of a man who refused to accept the limitations others tried to place on him." Lisa closed her notebook, clearly moved. "Thank you for sharing this with me. I promise to tell your story faithfully." As she walked away, Naomi turned to her father. "You ready to go home?" Elias nodded, rising slowly from the bench. "More than ready. There's a loose shingle on the east side I've been meaning to fix." Together, they walked toward Naomi's car, the afternoon sun casting their shadows long across the courthouse lawn. Daughter and father moving forward with the quiet assurance of those who had faced injustice and, at least for today, prevailed against it. 1 year later, the tree-lined street of Maple Avenue looked markedly different than it had the day Elias Monroe stood in court fighting for his home. While many of the neighboring houses had indeed been demolished to make way for the first phase of the Westfield Renewal Project, Elias's house stood proudly among the construction, an island of history amid a sea of change. The house itself had undergone a transformation, not of structure, but of significance. A small bronze plaque now adorned the front, identifying it as the Monroe House, built 1967-1972 by Elias Monroe, Korean War veteran and master craftsman. The designation had come following a petition drive led by Lisa Chen's powerful newspaper series, which had not only told Elias's story, but had exposed the systematic erasure of contributions by minority residents to Westfield's development. On this warm Saturday afternoon, cars lined both sides of Maple Street as people gathered for what had become an unexpected community celebration. In Elias's carefully tended backyard, tables had been set up beneath flowering dogwood trees. A banner hung between two maples. Westfield Historical Society presents Building History, the Monroe Legacy. Elias, now 80, moved among the guests with quiet pride, dressed in the same suit he had worn to court, though it had been carefully tailored to better fit his frame. At his side walked Judge Mercer, their unlikely friendship, one of the more surprising outcomes of the past year's events. "I still can't believe you agreed to share your techniques for that dovetail joining," the judge was saying, gesturing toward a display table where examples of Elias's craftsmanship were exhibited. "I've been woodworking as a hobby for 20 years, and I've never managed to get it that precise." Elias smiled. "It's all in the patience, Howard. You can't rush craftsmanship." Following the courtroom confrontation and the subsequent investigation, which had indeed revealed impropriety among certain county officials, Judge Mercer had taken the unexpected step of reaching out to Elias personally. What began as an apologetic conversation had developed into a genuine connection between two men who discovered a shared love of woodworking and jazz music. The judge had become one of the strongest advocates for preserving Elias's home as a historical landmark. Across the yard, Naomi was speaking with a group of architecture students from the State University who had come to study the house's unique construction. Her brother Michael, home on leave, stood nearby in his full-dress uniform, a visual reminder of the Monroe family's continued service to a country that had not always served them equally in return. Lisa Chin, now the Chronicle's lead investigative reporter following her award-winning series, Foundations: The Hidden History of Westfield's Development, approached Elias and the judge with her camera. "Mr. Monroe, would you mind if I got a photo of you two by the new historical marker? It would be perfect for our follow-up piece on how the preservation effort has changed local development policies." As they posed beside the bronze plaque, Lisa asked, "Judge Mercer, after a year of reflection, what would you say you've learned from this case?" The judge considered the question seriously. "I've learned that justice isn't just about the letter of the law. It's about seeing the humanity in each person who comes before the court. I failed to do that initially with Mr. Monroe, and in doing so, I nearly became an instrument of injustice rather than justice." He glanced at Elias with genuine respect. "I've also learned that dignity often speaks softly, and that tears can come from strength, not weakness. These are lessons I now share with every new judge I mentor." Elias, typically modest, simply nodded his acknowledgement of these words. As the afternoon progressed, Elias found himself seated on his back porch, taking a moment of quiet amid the celebration. A young black boy about 10 years old approached hesitantly, a school notebook in hand. "Mr. Monroe, I'm Darius. I'm doing a project for school about local heroes. Could I ask you some questions?" Elias smiled warmly, gesturing to the chair beside him. "Of course, young man. What would you like to know?" The boy opened his notebook, revealing carefully prepared questions. "My grandma says you built this whole house by yourself when nobody thought you could. Is that true?" "It's true that many people doubted it could be done," Elias replied. "But I had help from my wife, who believed in me even when I doubted myself. From friends who would lend a hand with the heaviest lifting. From my children who understood when I couldn't attend every school event because I was here building their future." Darius scribbled earnestly, "Were you scared when you had to go to court?" Elias considered this thoughtfully. "Not scared exactly. Sad, perhaps. It's a difficult thing to have your truth questioned, to have your life's work dismissed as insignificant. But I knew what was true even when others couldn't or wouldn't see it. My mom says, sometimes you'll have to stand up even when you're scared, even when people who seem important try to make you feel small. Your mother is a wise woman." Elias nodded. "Standing up doesn't always mean raising your voice or making a scene. Sometimes it just means remaining firm in your truth, even when tears come to your eyes." The boy looked up from his notebook, his expression serious beyond his years. "When I grow up, I want to build something that lasts too." Elias studied the child's face, seeing in it echoes of his own youthful determination. "You remember this, Darius? Anything worth building takes time, whether it's a house, a career, or a community. The things that last are built day by day with persistence. And no one gets to tell you what you're capable of building." As Darius continued his interview, Naomi watched from across the yard, struck by the poetic symmetry of the moment her father once dismissed as a confused old man, now passing wisdom to the next generation. The house that had nearly been erased from history now stood as a testament to perseverance, its very existence, a rebuke to those who would diminish the contributions of people like Elias Monroe. The Westfield Renewal Project continued around them, but with significant modifications. Following the investigation sparked by Naomi's courtroom revelations, new policies required historical assessment of all properties and fair market compensation for displaced residents. More importantly, longtime homeowners were now given the option to remain in place with development plans adapted around these islands of history, rather than simply sweeping them away. As the afternoon light began to soften into evening, guests gathered on the front lawn for a final photograph. Elias stood on his porch. The porch he had built board by board, nail by nail, surrounded by family, friends, and community members. Judge Mercer stood nearby, a living reminder that recognition and redemption were always possible, even after decades of oversight. In that moment, as camera shutters clicked and the golden hour light bathed the scene, Elias's house stood as more than just a structure that had withstood time and prejudice. It had become a symbol of how the quiet dignity of one man, even when met with laughter and dismissal, could ultimately change the course of an entire community's understanding of its own history. For the young people present, like Darius with his school project, the lesson was clear. Some foundations run deeper than concrete and steel. The strongest are built on truth that endures, on dignity that stands firm, and on the courage to weep without shame when confronting injustice. These were the true building materials of Elias Monroe's legacy, more lasting than wood, more valuable than the land that had nearly been stolen from beneath the house he built with his own hands.